Aaliyah Monroe was young, driven, and full of life. Mark Dalton was older, bitter, and hiding a dangerous obsession behind a badge. Their lives collided in a quiet suburban neighborhood, but what started as a strange friendship twisted into a deadly secret, one that would expose the dark truth behind a respected cop and the woman he refused to let go. The search for Aaliyah intensified as public pressure mounted and the media picked up the story. Her smiling face appeared on news broadcasts, flyers, and social media posts with the caption, "Missing, last seen with Officer Mark Dalton." Community outrage swelled, especially as details of Dalton's history began to surface. Disciplinary complaints buried by the department, reports of intimidation that were never fully investigated, and a pattern of targeting young black men. During routine patrols, none had ever stuck, until now. With Dalton placed on leave, detectives pursued a warrant to search his property. The moment they stepped inside his home, they were struck by the cold emptiness. No family photos, no signs of warmth or life. The furniture was pristine, the rooms eerily spotless. It didn't feel lived in, it felt staged. But in the garage, hidden beneath a false floorboard near the water heater, investigators found something that shattered the illusion. A fireproof safe had been tucked away under a heavy plastic storage bin. Inside, they discovered a chilling collection of evidence. Aaliyah's missing journal, several pages torn and stained, the SIM card from her destroyed phone, a necklace her grandmother said she wore every day, and a handgun registered to Dalton, one bullet missing. Each item was carefully placed as if preserved. But it was the journal that struck investigators hardest. Page after page documented months of discomfort, fear, and the slow unraveling of Aaliyah's peace. She had written everything: his controlling behavior, his unannounced visits, his obsession with her whereabouts. She described how he used his badge to keep her quiet, to make her feel powerless. She ended one entry with the words, "If anything happens to me, it was him." The forensic team scoured Dalton's home and vehicle. In the trunk of his police cruiser, traces of blood were found beneath the lining. DNA confirmed the worst. It was Aaliyah's. Under ultraviolet light, investigators also discovered smears and handprints along the edge of the trunk's lid, consistent with someone trying to push it open. There were no fingerprints, but there were drag marks in the carpet. It told a silent, horrifying story. Even more disturbing was what they found on Dalton's personal laptop. Hidden behind layers of encrypted files was a folder labeled Insurance. Inside were dozens of unauthorized photographs of Aaliyah, some taken from afar, others clearly inside her home while she was asleep. Investigators also found screenshots of her private messages, tracking apps, and emails she'd written but never sent. One was a draft to a professor explaining she needed help, but it was never sent. Another was a letter of resignation from her job. Neither had ever been opened. Tucked among these files was a chilling document, a draft confession, never printed, in which Dalton ranted about betrayal, guilt, and losing control. It was a mess of anger and delusion. He didn't accept blame, but instead wrote about being pushed too far and misunderstood. It ended abruptly with the line, "She was supposed to stay." Dalton was arrested within 48 hours of the search. What started as a missing persons case had become a murder investigation. The evidence was overwhelming, but the most haunting piece remained. Aaliyah's body was still missing. The day Aaliyah disappeared started like any other. She had a morning shift at the clinic, stopped by the grocery store, and was seen briefly chatting with a neighbor while unloading bags from her car. By sunset, her house was dark. Her phone went straight to voicemail. At first, no one panicked. She was an adult, independent, and busy. It wasn't unusual for her to go quiet for a few hours. But when her grandmother tried calling multiple times with no answer, worry set in. Aaliyah never ignored her calls, ever. By the following morning, panic replaced confusion. Her boss confirmed she hadn't shown up for her evening shift and hadn't called in. Her car was gone, her lights were off, and there were no signs of forced entry at her home. Her grandmother filed a missing persons report, and local officers began a routine check. Officer Mark Dalton was among the first to be notified. When asked, he said he hadn't seen her in days. It was a lie. Within 24 hours, Aaliyah's car was found abandoned on a narrow service road just outside town. The driver's door was slightly ajar, and her purse was still on the passenger seat. Her phone, smashed beyond repair, was discovered a few feet away in the brush. There were no signs of a struggle inside the vehicle, but the unease was immediate. Something was wrong. This wasn't just a disappearance, it looked like someone had wanted her gone. Despite the troubling signs, the initial investigation moved slowly. Police suggested she may have left voluntarily. They cited her age and independence as reasons not to jump to conclusions. But her grandmother insisted something was terribly wrong. She told officers that Aaliyah had become increasingly withdrawn, fearful and nervous in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. She told them about the man across the street, the one who never smiled until he started visiting her granddaughter. When investigators knocked on Dalton's door for questioning, he answered calmly. He wore the same composure he had perfected over years on the force. He claimed he hadn't spoken to Aaliyah in weeks. He said they were just friendly neighbors and suggested she might be overwhelmed with work and school. He offered to help with the search, even handed over security footage from his own porch camera. Curiously, the video had gaps, chunks of time mysteriously missing. As suspicions grew, detectives began quietly digging deeper. A routine canvass led them to a gas station security camera 3 miles from where Aaliyah's car was found. Footage from the night of her disappearance showed Aaliyah at the pump, and in the passenger seat, clearly visible in the glare of the overhead lights, was Dalton. That discovery shifted the case instantly. Dalton's lie about not seeing her unraveled. He was placed on administrative leave, but not yet charged. He maintained his innocence, but the unease among investigators deepened. A young woman was gone, and the man last seen with her was a cop known for keeping secrets. The question was no longer whether something terrible had happened. It was how far Dalton had gone to hide it. In the peaceful suburban neighborhood of Riverview Heights, life moved slowly. Well-kept lawns, quiet streets, and the gentle hum of sprinklers gave the impression of safety and order. It was the kind of place where families settled down, where mailboxes had the names of long-term residents, and where people rarely locked their doors at night. Officer Mark Dalton had lived there for over a decade. He was the kind of man people recognized but never really knew. A rigid, middle-aged white man with a buzz cut and a permanent scowl, Dalton rarely smiled, rarely spoke, and never joined in on the neighborly barbecues. Still, his badge and uniform gave him a kind of untouchable presence. To most, he was just another cop keeping the streets clean. But those who paid closer attention noticed things that didn't sit right. Some of the younger black boys in the neighborhood had stories, how he'd stopped them for walking too slow, how his questions were always laced with suspicion. Parents warned their children not to linger too long near his house, but nothing concrete ever came of the murmurs. Dalton was careful. He followed the rules just enough to stay under the radar, just enough to keep his record spotless. Across the street lived Aaliyah Monroe. At just 23, she was bright, focused, and full of potential. She had moved into her late grandmother's house after enrolling in nursing school nearby. Aaliyah stood out, not only because she was young and black in a neighborhood of older white families, but because she carried herself with confidence. She didn't shrink under the weight of the stairs. She ran every morning, smiled at strangers, and worked night shifts at a local clinic. She was building something, even if few around her understood what. Dalton noticed her almost immediately. At first, it was the occasional glance through his window as she pulled into her driveway. Then came the chance encounters. A mailbox mix-up, a loose dog he claimed to chase back into her yard. Soon he was offering her help. A flat tire in the morning, a broken porch light, a heavy package carried inside. Aaliyah was polite, if cautious. She didn't think much of it at first, but others did. Neighbors started to comment, softly in passing, about how often Dalton was seen near her home. Aaliyah brushed it off, saying he was just being helpful. Maybe he was lonely. Maybe he was trying to be kind in his own awkward way. But there was something beneath the surface she didn't fully understand. Something that made her pause every time he lingered too. Long in the driveway, every time his eyes followed her across the street. He had a wife, though she was rarely seen. No kids, no visitors. His home was cold and quiet. Yet there he was, finding reasons to be around Aaliyah, watching, waiting. Whatever boundaries existed in his mind were beginning to blur, and Aaliyah, unknowingly, had stepped into the path of something dangerous. The trial of Officer Mark Dalton became a national headline. What had once been a quiet local investigation now gripped the country, igniting debates about power, race, and the unchecked authority of law enforcement. In the courtroom, Dalton sat stone-faced, his expression blank as witness after witness described his obsession with Aaliyah Monroe. Prosecutors laid out the evidence piece by piece, the journal, the surveillance footage, the blood found in his trunk, the disturbing files on his computer. Every detail painted a picture of a man who had crossed every boundary and spiraled into violence when control slipped from his grasp. Dalton pleaded not guilty. His defense claimed the relationship was consensual and suggested Aaliyah had run away to escape pressure from family and school. They tried to cast doubt on the forensic evidence, arguing that her journal was exaggerated, the blood inconclusive, and the missing body proof of nothing. But the jury didn't buy it. Too many pieces fit together, too many. Lies had been exposed. Aaliyah's words, written in her own hand, echoed through the courtroom. Her fear was clear, her desperation undeniable. Still, the trial dragged on for weeks. There were delays, motions, and emotional testimony from friends, co-workers, and Aaliyah's grandmother, who sat through every moment, holding a photograph of the granddaughter she had raised. She testified about the phone calls that suddenly stopped, about the changes she saw in Aaliyah's behavior, about the days and nights of waiting by the door with no knock. Her voice never wavered as she demanded justice, not just for Aaliyah, but for every black woman whose cries had been ignored. Then came the final twist. During the third week of trial, a construction crew working on a storm drain expansion 2 counties over made a gruesome discovery. Hidden in a shallow ravine, wrapped in layers of industrial plastic and buried beneath rocks, was a decomposing body. Dental records confirmed what everyone feared. It was Aaliyah Monroe. Her remains showed signs of blunt force trauma to the head and fractured ribs. Nearby, investigators found remnants of Dalton's uniform buried in the soil and tire tracks matching his off-duty vehicle. The discovery was the final nail in the coffin. The jury returned with a guilty verdict on all charges: kidnapping, unlawful surveillance, destruction of evidence, and first-degree murder. Dalton showed no emotion as the judge read the sentence: life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom remained silent, a heavy stillness settling as the weight of justice finally came down. But no sentence could erase the pain. Aaliyah's death became a symbol, her story a warning. Activists demanded reforms, community members called for oversight, and the department where Dalton had served was placed under federal review. Memorials were held in her honor, and her journal, once hidden in a drawer, became part of public exhibits focused on domestic abuse and power dynamics in policing. Aaliyah Monroe's life was stolen, but her truth could no longer be silenced. She had been afraid, but she'd also been brave enough to leave behind her story. And in the end, it was her voice that led to the truth.